deeper was this idea of the collective unconscious. And it's the reason why I dwell more on Carl Jung, because he was a deep influence on my work, and particularly the collective unconscious is what we're attempting to do here with these live streams by synchronizing everybody's brainwaves through headphones with a single soundtrack that brain entrains everyone together to a single place, aligning the collective unconscious. Here, the collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. And I'm going to flesh this out, what he was talking about here. This statement that the spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution is born anew in the brain structure of every individual is something that came from his study of these ancient texts from China called the I Ching. So just as we had talked about the ancient texts from India, which I spent a lot of time, the Vedas and the Upanishads and the Sutras of Patanjali, these almost 4,000-year-old texts, the oldest texts on earth, by the way, except for the Chinese texts of the I Ching. So this is right up there on a par with the Vedas, equally as old, with a tradition that goes into pre-written history, just like the ancient traditions of from the Indian culture before it was written down in, were oral traditions that passed from generation to generation for thousands of years. The same thing with the Chinese, until in the King Wen dynasty, around 4,000 years ago, the first written texts of the I Ching were put down to paper. The study of the I Ching has been my life's work. I first came across the I Ching in 1966. A friend of mine gave me the book. This was the book he gave me, the Wilhelm Baines edition of the I Ching right here. That is the one to have. It's a hardbound book. Usually after a while the cover ends up disappearing and it's this beautiful yellow book. Now this book is the embodiment of Chinese wisdom in one book, and the Wilhelm Baines edition is the most profound translation that I know of. I have purchased all kinds of different I Ching books from all kinds of different authors to compare to see what different translations look like, and by far the Wilhelm Baines is the most amazing. The Wilhelm Baines edition also has it's not just a book of wisdom, but it's a book of divination. It's an oracle. You can consult the I Ching by either throwing 3 coins or doing a ceremony with 50 yarrow stalks. And the yarrow stalk method was the ancient traditional method, which in more modern times changed, modern times 1,000 years ago, changed to coins, which is a shorter method of getting a readout. And the book is divided up, this particular book is divided up into 3 sections. The first section of this book is a sort of an introduction treatise on the I Ching, what it is, how to use it to divine an answer. And then the middle portion of the text is an analysis of all the 64 kind of ways that you can come up with something called a hexagram, which I'll explain here. These yarrow stalks So also the introduction of this version of the I Ching, the Wilhelm Baines edition, the introduction of this book is written by Carl Jung. And it has commentaries on the hexagrams written by Confucius himself. So this really is a mind-blower of a book. And in that introduction, Carl Jung discusses these yarrow stalks, the traditional method, where the yarrow, this is yarrow right here, the yarrow stalks were supposed to be gathered from the graves of your own ancestors. And doing a ceremony with the stalks was called consulting the ancestors. If you think about it for a minute, if these plants were grown off the graves of your own ancestors, then their body would have been fertilizer and their essence would be in this plant. So by chopping these stalks off in a bundle, you would have a bundle of stalks that were grown from the fertilizer of your own ancestors' bodies, and their essence, their kind of DNA thing would be in here. I'm not going to get into the whole how you do the ceremony of dividing these stalks and counting them in order to do the divination. But this was the deep meditative ceremony to consult the I Ching. This is a statement by him. For more than 30 years I have interested myself in this oracle technique or method of exploring the unconscious, for it has seemed to me of uncommon significance. And the reason for that is because these 64 hexagrams, these 64 answers that are possible, are symbolic symbols. And the Chinese are famous for that. The Chinese language is a right brain language, which has symbolic images that have more than one meaning, and depending on how they're aligned together, the meaning of each is changed by the one next to it, and that comes up with the interpretation. Very different from the linear way that English is put together, where each word has a meaning. In Chinese, Chinese symbols do not have a single meaning. So in this idea of the I Ching with the hexagrams, each of those symbols was interpreted depending on other aspects, which I'll explain a little bit here. Here's how it works. Male, female, the yin-yang symbol, and the male principle comes into a solid line, female into a broken line. And then we double this and it goes into the 4 great possibilities of greater and lesser yang, greater and lesser yin. And then these combine into a third one. These are called the 8 trigrams, because there's 3. So like I said, heaven, lake, here's fire with a broken line in between. Its opposite is water. Thunder, wind, mountain, earth. And so that's the 8 great primal forces of nature arranged in a compass heading, where we have north and south and east and west, and different seasonal things are associated with each one as well. Times of day associated with each one. So this is the basic setup. Now if we take these 8 trigrams, because there's only 8 possible ways of combining 3 things together like this, and we double them, we end up with 64 hexagrams that look like this. So these would be the lower trigrams and these would be the upper trigrams, and where we bring one down and cross it over to the other, we get the 64 hexagrams that show up. All 64 possible mathematical ways that 8 trigrams can combine together. Every once in a while you'll see that the top trigram and the bottom trigram are identical. So that's this one. The top one and the bottom one are identical. You see that? These 3 here are the same as these 3 here. And that goes in a line down diagonally, where each of these is a doubling at the top and the bottom. So this represents the 8 extra super primal forces of nature. And they would be called that. This would be called heaven, right? And this one here would be called fire, etc. This is a chart that you actually practically use in the book. So if I show you my book here, in the back of this book, there's a page that shows essentially the same thing, and it shows looking up the top trigram and the bottom trigram, and in here is the number of the trigram and how you look that up in the book. So, and we'll see. Here's a hexagram with its number, with a text that shows, it reads the imagery of this and gives you a readout of which hexagram you've got. In addition, since there's 8 of these trigrams, the primal forces, that is one complete octave. So that's C to C, 1 octave higher. 7 notes in an octave, and then beginning the next octave. So that means that there's an actual note, a musical tone for each of these 8 trigrams. And when we combine one trigram with another, it means we have 2 tones for each hexagram. Each of the 64 hexagrams has a different 2-tone combination relationship, which is a primitive chord. So all 64 hexagrams actually have a tone associated with them, a double tone chord associated with them.